Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the latest episode of our Franchise Readiness Series, where we help people considering the path of business ownership understand the options and opportunities available, and how franchising could be the choice that works for them. I'm your host, Brian Wieters, Group Vice President of Franchise Development at Neighborly. I've spent over 30 years in franchising, leading development teams at multiple brands in the quick serve, business services, and home services industries. On today's webinar, we're going to talk about franchise resales, which is an area of business ownership that may offer advantages that you could be looking for. I have some very special guests with me today. First, with Neighborly's resale department, we have Alicia Yankee, Vice President of Development Resales. She leads their team of resale specialists focused solely on the sale of existing businesses. From Focus Franchise, we have with us Diana Caparano, Franchise Resale Specialist and M&A Intermediary Broker. Diana's expertise is helping and coaching people through the process of business acquisition and ownership. And of course, Doug Johns, owner of Mr. Rooter Franchise in the Portland, Oregon area, and former Air Force officer and accomplished global executive. Doug recently went through the process of acquiring an existing franchise and is seeing great success. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
So you're ready? We'll kind of dive right in.
Sounds great.
Okay. So first, let's start with Alicia. We'll start with this. Let's start with what the understanding of a resale is. Some people don't understand what that word even means. So what's a definition around resale?
Yeah, so resale is simply an existing business that is for sale. So when you think of resale, you've got someone that is reselling it to someone else.
Got it. Okay. And then Diana, what are some of the most common reasons that someone would be interested in purchasing an existing business versus starting something from scratch?
Mm-hmm. Some of the reasons, I think the most important reason, at least that people cite, is that the business is already established. So like Alicia said, it's existing, right? They don't have to do the heavy lifting with the startup. A lot of people are averse to that, and it just seems an easier way to go. Having said that, there's different types of resales, right? So categorically, there's resales that perform very well, right? That are cash flowing and, they're just picture perfect. Almost.
Right.
Okay. Not everything's picture perfect. And then there's some that I would qualify as underperforming. Okay. So some resales that, just need a little TLC, right? Some tender loving care, turnaround. Then there's also a resale category that would be, like a negative cash flow, a business that really it's established and, it's branded in the area and there's some good attributes, but the business may be losing money. Okay. So I think the most important thing for the audience to understand in the definition of a resale is they're not all created equal.
Sure.
And there's many different types.
Diana, what are the benefits then of buying a franchise resale versus an independent business? Are there advantages to that?
Well, maybe I'm a little biased.
Okay.
Could be. No, but frankly, an independent resale is not going to, aside from the numbers, I think what people look at, Brian, first is the numbers, right?
Okay.
So if there's people out there looking at, a business number to number, independent versus franchise, they can stack up equally, correct?
Okay.
In terms of the franchise, I think we have to ask ourselves, what's the benefit of a franchise in period, right? Versus an independent business. So there's a lot of reasons, and I think we're going to get into that a little bit later. But, the most important reason would be the support of the system, the roadmap to follow. There's just an infrastructure that's already there. So even if an independent had built an infrastructure, having the franchise system, and what I mean by system is the franchisor, the franchisees, the resources, everything else that it brings to the table. So people have to weigh that, in terms of the value
of that.
If it fits their needs. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Anything else on that?
Well, I think too the value of a franchise versus an independent, comes from that national brand name recognition, right? When we're going down, let's say the highway and we stop for lunch, what do we look for, right? We look for those brand names that we know, we trust, that we can expect the consistency for. And so I think that's one of the benefits that a national franchise can bring, because most of our purchases these days are from either big box stores like Target or Walmart or Lowe's, or they're from franchise opportunities. Like the marketplace for mom and pop purchases that we go to is getting smaller and smaller.
Right. And that's something kind of a North American phenomenon that's happened. That branding is so important in our lives and what we do. So, Doug, you purchased an existing Mr. Rooter franchise. All right. So, just kind of walk me through what that experience was like for you.
Well, I think before we get to the Mr. Rooter, I got to retreat a little bit of
Sure.
kind of what were the conditions that were going on.
Yeah.
And, I didn't enter the search saying, which franchise should I buy?
Okay.
It was, what business are we looking for? So, the short version was my wife and I were looking at the career trajectory. I had not that many stops in my career. I had been on the Air Force for a while, worked for the Campbell Soup Company as a brand manager and marketing for 9 years. And then I had been for 13 years with my previous employer as an executive. Thought I was going to retire from there and would have been happy to. But then one day, the owners came to the executive team and said, we'd like you to sell the company. And my wife and I said, this doesn't always work out for the executive team.
Right.
Maybe we're not going to be aligned with the people who buy it. Maybe they're not going to want us around. Maybe they're their own people. And what are we going to do? So, I don't want to climb the ladder again. And we literally typed into Google, how do you buy a business?
Right.
Had no idea.
Right.
And started down that path. And so we said, let's take the preponderance of our life savings and push them across the table and buy an existing business. And the concept of the existing business was because, at age 50 with college and above age children and a reasonable income, we didn't want to stop earning money in a startup phase.
Right.
And we had amassed some resources. And so the idea of picking something up where we could replace our salary and have the independence and the freedom of being business owners and work together was a lot more appealing than going back into the corporate world. So we began our search, and we're looking just broadly. We had a geographic search. We had a size of business was one of our criteria. And then the third piece was that it needed to be a business where we felt good about what we were selling or providing.
Okay.
And that service or product was not something where we could lose to an import or a website. It just needed to be physical. And that put us into the home services space. And from there, looked at hundreds of listings, dozens of investment memorandums of all kinds of businesses. And the one that came up that we eventually landed on, and we can talk more about that, was Mr. Rooter Plumbing in Portland.
Great. So, Alicia, so obviously when you're looking at franchising, there's some misconceptions out there about franchises. What are some of those misconceptions when people are just starting that search?
Yeah, I think the first one is just the misconception that, the franchisor is going to be running the show. Or I've heard, right, the franchisor is going to have their thumb on you. Like, I'm not really going to be the business owner. And what I would say to that is you are. Right. You are the business owner. We say frequently that you're in business for yourself, just not by yourself. So I kind of think of analogy of the franchise owner is steering the ship, right? Mm-hmm. They just have extra paddlers helping them go faster, or extra engines, depending on whatever vessel you're on, right? But they are the ones making the decisions for the business. And also, it's not only do they have the extra support to help them get to where they want to go faster, with a franchise, you've got a roadmap. And so I think that again goes to the prior questions. What are some of the benefits? Yes, they are making the decisions as the business owner, but they're not having to go through, the trial and error of what's working, what's not working, right? So they can use that roadmap again to get them to where they want to go quicker. So I think that's one of the main misconceptions is, hey, am I really actually going to be running the show? Mm-hmm. You are. You just have a team of support that's helping you get to whatever you want to accomplish quicker.
Right. Yeah, I can validate that. When Georgina and I were looking at businesses to buy, and we saw the listing for this one, it didn't say, none of them ever do, what the actual business is because it's confidential. Right. And when we received the confidential investment memorandum and saw it was a franchise, I paused. that was just not even my mindset, and that was this misconception. I'm like, wait a second, I'm doing this in part because I want to be the leader, the owner, this freedom component. And clearly, as we got deeper and deeper, we thought, no, this is actually great, and we bought. But that was a misconception. At this point, I like to say that I don't feel stifled. I feel supported. And yes, we make the hiring decisions. We make, or the benefits we're offering. We're setting our own prices. We're running that business. And there's all this awesome support. Probably rattle some of those things off in a minute. But,
I think the other thing too with that is, having that support when you look at, okay, I'm going to start my own business or I'm going to purchase an independent company. A lot of times the challenges with that is they're having to wear multiple hats. They're having to be a marketing expert, right? They're having to go out and negotiate and secure, rebates or, how can I get things that I need for my business cheaper? They're, okay, how do I recruit? How do I set up my social media Facebook page? Right. So they're having to figure out a lot of it by themselves. And again, that kind of can slow down the progression of when they can open or when they can, increase the trajectory of their growth when we already had that figured out, right? And so it's more of a plug and play, but again, they're actually the ones executing on it.
Yeah. And even if I can add to that, Alicia, too, it's a great point, even the cost of it, right? Because the question, Brian, is misconception. A lot of the misconception, at least that I hear in my position, right, is, oh, no, I don't want a franchise. I'm not considering franchise because of, royalty. There's that word, royalty. And it's like a fee that has to be paid. And, I always say to somebody, let's look at that royalty because all franchises aren't created equal. Neighborly is superior, right? And the ROI, your return on investment of a royalty or a marketing fee, has to be weighed against the value of what you're receiving. And at least you mentioned marketing, right? For somebody to go out and design a website and put all this money, even in a startup phase, is astronomical. So the value that comes, it's just intrinsic value to the franchise. So fees would be one that I would say is a big misconception. Sure. And the other thing that I'll add
before
to that,
you go to the other, can I talk about fees?
Absolutely.
So I think in particular in the resale space, that the notion of a royalty is irrelevant. Yes, there's value for the royalty. That's an important conversation. But as we were evaluating businesses, and I would have bought an independent business if I found the right one. Right? I'm happy with this one. Fantastic choice. But it was ultimately math. Right. So when someone's looking to buy an existing business and there's one that doesn't have royalties, but it's got cash flow of X, and there's one that does have royalty, but the cash flow is 2X, you can't spend percentage. Right. So just because this business has 0% royalties and this one has some royalties, if this one's doing more cash flow generation, great. And that's the beauty of resale, because you can, while there's no guarantees that cash flow is going to continue, like even with an independent business, at least this is how much cash that business has been spinning off for the last couple of years. What am I willing to pay for those cash flows? Right. Totally different scenario in resale.
Well, there's always going to be a cost of business. There's always going to be a cost to conduct, whatever business you're looking at. Right. So again, it goes back to the focus on, okay, of that cost, what is the business generating profit-wise? Right.
Yeah, you're right. Royalty is already baked in, right? And when you're looking at financials on an existing business, it doesn't matter if it's independent or if it's a franchise. The royalty on the franchise is already baked into those financials. So you're just looking at cash flow because obviously your purchase price is based off of that. That's right. So that's right. That's so royalties don't play as big a part, but it does up front because it's like they don't even want to look at it.
Because it's a stigma, right? Yeah. It's a stigma. And I guess the other stigma that I see a lot is, or what I hear is no expansion. Alicia mentioned the independent, not having the ability to run your own business, and you certainly do. Yeah. But it's also because of the territory. So it's like, I won't be able to expand, or I'm going to be confined. And the one thing that Neighborly does well, right, because the size of Neighborly and the different brands within Neighborly and what Neighborly has to offer. So maybe in certain franchises, possibly, there would be those limitations. But I think you have to look at the franchisor as a whole and a big picture. Right. So are there expansion opportunities within your brand, within your geographic area, with a different brand within the same umbrella franchise or conglomerate. And that's something, as I meet people and talk them through it, like, oh, I didn't know that.
Right.
Well, you didn't know it because, you're, first of all, you're starting to get educated, right? But to your point, misconception, right? So I don't
And
know why
Brian,
that's
I
escalating.
think that we haven't come across a scenario where we have a franchise owner that is positioned to expand, right? Wants to expand where there wasn't an opportunity, right? Because it's there's several options. It's either expanding the service area, right? It's purchasing additional markets. And to Diana's point, we're starting to see more because we do have more than one or two brands, right? That they have the opportunity to stay in the market that they've done well in and purchase another brand.
Right. Yeah, there's lots of different opportunities because of our size. No doubt about it.
And every business has market penetration opportunity.
Yes.
You know,
That's it.
show me a business that's got full market share that they could possibly achieve.
Yeah.
So
And room in the home services field. Originally, why you even focused on home services in the first place was that's a part of it, right? There's no, you aren't going to find a home services provider in any market that has even a majority market share. It just doesn't happen.
we're a larger
Yeah.
franchise. We've got 50 people that work at the company. We're in the top 3 plumbing companies in Portland. I think our market share is between 3 and 4%.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
Lots of upside
There's
just
lots
by
of upside.
any business you've got. Lots of upside by running it with excellence and going deeper in the existing territory.
Right.
And Doug, with a with a franchise like Neighborly and a strong franchisor, they are constantly exploring different service lines. So even though you're categorically in one area, the one thing the power and the bandwidth and the strength of a franchise system is to continue to evolve.
Right.
And not that you can't do that on your own as an independent, right? But it does take a lot more of what we're just talking about,
Right.
A lot more of that thought, capital, everything else. When you have a franchise system like Neighborly behind you, you have that going on that you may not be aware of, right?
Right.
It's in the background and all of that's happening. And then all of a sudden, there's this other service line that could be launched as part of your business model.
Right.
And then you're able to, generate revenue from that. So it's a huge plus for franchise.
No doubt. And that kind of feeds into, Alicia, how when it comes to a person looking at a franchise resale, how they go through evaluating that resale, right? Because y'all have already hit on some of those points. So it's a little bit different than looking at independent business because you have to evaluate more than just the business itself.
Right. So I think I'll go back to what Doug had shared is before he even, went to the internet, right, and started his search, he kind of walked through with Georgina what are the things that were important to them, right? And so I really think that that's the starting point because it can get overwhelming. You've got these, business for sale websites, and if you're not really sure what you're looking for, you're going to be looking a long time, right? And so I would say the first thing in terms of evaluating a franchise opportunity is really what is it that you and your family are wanting to accomplish? What is it that you're wanting to change, right? What's important to you? What are your goals? And I would say have 2 or 3 of those kind of lined out. Some things that we commonly see is the financial opportunity, right? I feel like I'm in, a corporate salaried position and I've got a ceiling and I just don't see anywhere that I can financially, increase past that ceiling. Some things that we hear commonly is, the work-life balance, right? I'm tired of working 40 plus, 50 plus, 60 plus hours for helping someone else build their business. Another thing is we see sometimes is relocation, right? There's already a change happening in the family. They're relocating, right? So are they going to look for another corporate position? Or, that sometimes was what opens up, looking into business ownership.
Right.
So I would say start there, right? What personally are you wanting to accomplish? Because a lot of times it doesn't matter the business, right? That's just more the vehicle to help them accomplish their goals. Like Doug, I don't think that you came into it when you went to the website and said, okay, it's a plumbing company, right? You started with, okay, here's what I'm wanting to accomplish. What type of business can help me accomplish it? And I think, again, a lot of the owners that we work with, They don't say, "Oh, I wanted a residential cleaning company," right?
Yeah.
So I'd start there. What are we trying to accomplish? But then I think once you get into evaluating, do we decide to purchase an independent business or a franchise opportunity? I think there's a couple things that you're evaluating. So when you are looking at a existing franchise location, you're evaluating the performance of that business, just like you would if it was an independent business, right? How long have they been in business?
Right.
What is the trajectory of their growth, right? How successful are they? But then on the resale side, you're evaluating the franchisor. Because one thing, and Diana, you can add to this, not every franchisor or franchise brand is created equal, right? So I think there's a whole nother evaluation on the franchisor, the support they provide, what is that relationship that they have with their franchise owners.
Culture, I agree. And I couldn't say it better. I mean, the evaluation is mutual, right? So I agree with you, Alicia. It's first of all is knowing your why.
Yeah.
Why? Why do I need a business, want a business? I'll elaborate a little bit to rewind. There's people today I hear, today more so than ever, right, in economic times is, what am I going to do with my money? Where do I put my money?
Yeah.
Right? Is it going into the market? I don't want to keep my cash in the bank. So there's a lot of people that are coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, Brian, that are saying, you know what? Either they're talking to others or people like myself and think, I think I want to park it in a business. I want to invest in myself.
Right.
So let's think about business ownership has always been an investment in yourself. But today the investment is really more driven by where else is their money making money, or what is their opportunity. So that's definitely happening, today. I would say that, to Alicia's point earlier too, is evaluating that fit. They are not all created equal. I represent over 850 franchise brands, which is, when I tell people that, they're like, what? Now, that doesn't mean I work with all of them, right? But I have access to that many and familiar with a lot. And Neighborly, this is unbiased. Neighborly is my favorite because of the systems, because of the bandwidth. I feel comfortable taking a listing to sell that business, and I feel comfortable bringing a buyer, like a Doug or anyone, to a brand that really has so much to offer. To fit those needs. If it is that lifestyle, if there's a brand that you want to be an owner operator and buy a job and work full time, you can do that. If you want to be a semi-absentee owner, and have an infrastructure, you can do that. I would say for Neighborly too, and people that come to know Neighborly, culture and fit is very important. So, excuse me. So knowing that you fit in with the organization, the values. I guess, and then the last point I would wind up with would be, the other reasons for investing is, is it because you left corporate and you need the job? Like there's all this going on right now, but there's people I see today that are looking longer term and saying, I want to invest in myself, but also see my family. To protect them, for my children who are growing. Neighborly has a lot of, I'll call legacy businesses. Businesses that have been long term. They're here today, here tomorrow, not here today, gone tomorrow. So I think that's part of that evaluation process too, is do you just want a business that you can own and operate for a couple years? Or are you looking at something really that can be longer term, and fund your retirement and so on and so forth? So know that why.
And I would say, for some of you maybe that have already started the process and have evaluated a franchise opportunity, but maybe it's just one, and you determine for whatever reason, hey, this isn't a good fit, whether it was culture, whether it was the support or lack of support that they provided. I guess I would just encourage you to look at another opportunity, just going back to not every franchisor and franchise brand is equal.
Doug, how did you, when you went through the process and once you locked in on, hey, at this particular resale, it is a franchise, so obviously I've got a little bit more evaluation to do than just the numbers, right? How did you go about that? What did that look like for you?
How do we evaluate the Neighborly component?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You hit a few. So the first one, once I learned more about Neighborly, I got pretty excited within the franchise space. So, okay, if I'm going to be a franchisee, I want to be a franchisee of a real organization that knows how to provide support, knows what they're doing. And I had, looked at other listings where the franchisor has one brand and a small number of locations. This looks like you're actually just trying to make money off of me. And when we got inside Neighborly, I said, this is a long-standing, real organization with all the functions. It's kind of what I've seen in my corporate career. And I liked that because it gave me confidence that there was real support there and staying power and professionalism. And that has come true. One small example, the scale of Neighborly, in the electrical, plumbing, HVAC space, the best companies use a Service Titan software program to manage our businesses. An independent plumbing shop that only has 3 vans can't even get Service Titan. Service Titan will not provide that software. When a shop is part of Neighborly, because of that scale, that 3-truck shop, the smaller franchisee, gets Service Titan at a great rate because of Neighborly. But even just the access is huge. And so the scale of Neighborly has a lot of power to it that was attractive to me once I started to learn. The second piece was I wanted to see how others who had done similar things were performing, and Neighborly was super open about that and connected me with franchisees to talk to, one of whom has become a close friend, and I'm now in a peer group with.
Okay.
So it's a whole other scale thing of Neighborly, but 4 of the Mr. Rooters around the country that are of similar size to mine, we meet once a month. We compare numbers. We talk about business challenges. That's not technically something I get out of my royalties, but I couldn't have that if I was outside of the franchise.
I think that
network.
goes back to, Doug, the question, what are some of the benefits of a franchise versus an independent that we haven't touched on?
Right.
And a lot of the times, when I speak to, individuals that have decided, okay, this is the right path for me and my family, they don't reference, okay, why is that? Well, they don't reference, because of the network of franchise owners. But then when we see them at annual reunion a couple years later, right, and we ask, hey, how's it going? What has contributed to your success? By far, most of them say it's that support of other franchise owners that they wouldn't receive if they were an independent business owner, right? You can't call your competitor, down the road and say, hey, John, what are you charging, right? Can we kind of talk through what are your profit margins or what is your cost of goods sold? You can do that in a franchise space.
That's tremendous. Even across brands.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've
That's
gotten
the
some
transparency.
relationships going with a couple of the other home services brands within Neighborly that are not plumbing, but are similar businesses in different markets. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So there's lots of advantages.
I do want to throw out one more on the evaluation question.
Sure.
It just ties back to the values. We needed to make sure that we were comfortable attaching ourselves to Neighborly.
Yeah.
And that happened really fast. The Neighborly code of values, the history of that, the people we met said, okay, I would be willing to come here as an employee.
Okay.
So therefore,
That's a good litmus test.
Yeah. That's
I'm willing
Yeah.
to own a business that's under this franchise umbrella.
Yeah, that's a really good litmus test. You're right. So it is. So Alicia, I've heard from a couple of our vendors that work with Neighborly that Neighborly is one of the few companies out there that has a dedicated resale team. So how does that impact this whole process and what we do?
So first up, I'm super proud of what we've built over the years. It continues to grow as we add in new brands.
Right.
Our resale efforts, the amount of resales that we do every year continues to grow. But I think that the resale support and how it impacts the process is twofold, right? You've got the seller side of things, where we provide support to our franchise owners in how to sell their business. Because a lot of times what we found, Doug, this will be your experience, when they come into business ownership, it's the first time they've ever owned a business.
Right.
So when they go to sell it, whether that's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we've got one that you mentioned, the tenure of our brands, they've been in it for 26 years. And the only reason they're looking to sell is because they want to retire, right? But they've never gone through that process before.
Right.
And so having a team of experts that have, right, hundreds of times can kind of help coach them through the process, right? What to prepare for. And Doug, I don't know in your experience in looking at independent business opportunities, how prepared were those how prepared were those owners?
Yeah, it varied wildly.
Yeah.
Right. Of course. I mean, some of them were, and I still look at businesses for sale. It's kind of become a hobby, and I coach some people who are looking to do the same thing. I was just looking at one the last 2 days. And sometimes you show up and the listing is just some Excel spreadsheets, and the seller is trying to avoid paying for help because and it's just a disaster. And then sometimes they're better. And it's a bit of a plug, but the best listing that I looked at was this one.
Yep.
And, full disclosure, Diana was the representative of the seller. Right. So, but I think a good part of that reason was the seller of the Mr. Reader I bought went all in with the resale team, took all the help, all the advice, and what came across was so polished that when I opened it, it immediately stood out. And I have looked at hundreds of these kind of listings.
Well, again, I think it goes back to, what is the goal of a business owner, right? So we said start there, right? What are we trying to accomplish? But a lot of times it's not just building and scaling a business, right? It's, one of the reasons they're wanting to do that versus a W-2 corporate job is to build equity, right? We hear that word a lot, right? I want to build equity so I have something to sell, right? When I don't want to work anymore.
Right.
And so, yes, we help our franchise owners through the sales process when that time comes, but we're also helping them before that time comes, right? With succession planning, because really you should start to look at and plan for the sale of a business 2 to 3 years prior to the time that you want to sell. So I think there's the support that we provide on the seller side to help the franchise owner realize, it goes back to the return on the investment, right? Realize their return on their investment through a sale when it's the right time. But that also does, to Doug's point, impact the buyer side of it in terms of how seamless or how easy is the evaluation process. And so our team is not representing either side. We're not representing the buyer. We're not representing the seller. Diana can kind of speak to that because that's where she comes into play. Like we're helping both parties coach and go through the process, right? We're helping the buyer understand and evaluate the business that they're looking at, as well as us, right? As well as Neighborly, as well as the brand, really to determine, is it a good fit? And if it is a good fit, then can the parties come together and agree on terms that works for everybody? Diana, you mentioned the win-win-win, right? Is it a win for the buyer? Is it a win for the seller? And then, of course, is it a win for us and the new owner that's coming on board? So, again, we've got 6 resale franchise developers. So it's not just one you referenced. We've got a team, right? We've got a team that is dedicated to provide the franchise owner support, the seller, right? Support the potential franchise owner that's evaluating the opportunity across our 19 North America brands.
Yeah. What I appreciate most, Brian, is the system, right, that Alicia's team has put into place. So we talk about franchise systems, follow the system, follow the roadmap. There is the same thing in the resale department, right? So it's the continuity of beginning, with that system. And what I find differentiating about Neighborly is, having a dedicated team and the leadership to guide that person through. So the first conversation, and I don't know what those conversations sound like, Alicia, but they may sound like to your team, hey, thinking about selling, or something to that effect, or maybe they're putting their feelers out. So Alicia's team is able to coach that person. Is it the right time? You mentioned the 3 years of financials and succession planning. I tell people when I meet them for the first time and they're investing in a business, well, think about the end. Think about selling it. And they're like, wait a minute, I didn't even buy a business yet. I'm just looking to buy it. And most people, I said, no, we want to find you a business and get you a business, but I want you to think about, that end. And when I'm able to present Neighborly, or a buyer like Doug, when I'm representing a seller for Neighborly, it's that same kind of a thing. And speak highly of the resale team because they do follow that process. They care about that seller getting the most value. Like to some, it's, hey, I want to get the most money I can get. And others, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, they'll come and they have just some lofty expectations. Right? Let me put it that way. There's lofty expectations as to what the business can get.
Right.
Alicia's team can help sort of guide in terms of, hey, this is what we think, this is what we see. Again, Neighborly captures a lot of data. You do a lot of resales. You have information on that, which is great. Other franchisors don't have that. You know, I don't think they're capturing data like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I appreciate most is really having that education that's happening from the franchisor. I, as a broker, intermediary, am able to now educate with a different set of eyes, you know, different mindset, and take that person through it and, you know, work well with that team. So we sync up, and our end goals are all the same.
Right.
Our end goals are to have that owner exit because they want to, whatever their reasons are, to do it smoothly. You know, it's definitely as painlessly as possible, right? It's not a pain point, but to have it be that win-win-win.
Right.
Well, and the other thing too, going back to, you know, the support, how does it impact the process? One thing we haven't talked about is the funding side of it. Okay, so they've decided, okay, I'm wanting to be a business owner, right? What am I looking for? So we start there. What are we trying to accomplish? But then the next question a lot of times is, how am I going to fund it? Right? Because it does look differently. The investment, right, to Doug's point, looks very different, can look very different than what a startup investment looks like.
Right.
There's different funding options. So I know that we, you know, in the past franchise readiness series, right, we talked about funding. You know, we're able to help connect, you know, potential business owners with lending partners that's specific to acquisitions, right? So there is an SBA that can help fund startups, but there is an SBA loan program that is specific to purchasing an existing business. So again, we've got those relationships. They don't have to use them, but those lenders know Neighborly. They know our brands, right? So it just helps the process go smoothly.
It's an added resource that you know your team brings to the table.
And another expert, right? So in this whole process, the thing, Doug, I heard you say when you and Georgina were first trying to decide, okay, we want to go, we do want to buy a business. We've decided that's the route we want to go. We're not going to go back into corporate America. I'm going to go do this route. The first thing you did was obviously you didn't know how to do that, right? So you sought out experts, right? And that's so important. And why like Diana and what she does is so important. And then even Neighborly and what we do, and being an expert in our space of franchising, you know, seeking out those experts to help you. Right? And funding's no different, right? Find somebody who's used to doing acquisitions, a lender that's used to doing acquisitions. And it makes life so much easier, right? So as you go through it, a little bit more seamless, I should say, right? Right.
And the fact that those lenders even exist is so amazing. This is a great place to live with the SBA.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we won't throw numbers out on the table, but you know, we put a significant amount of cash in for the purchase,
Right.
and a very significant amount of debt that in most places in the world would not happen for an individual investor, but because of the Small Business Association loan backing program, banks are willing to do that. And we were able to purchase a much larger business than I had imagined when I started my first search because I didn't understand how these acquisitions get funded.
I think that goes back to maybe one of the misconception is, okay, let's say you are on a business for sale website, right? And you see a business that's $1 million. You're like, well, there's no way I can afford that.
Right.
Well, you're not having to come out of your pocket. You could,
Right.
but you're not having to come out of your pocket $1 million, right? So, and then they go to a local bank, right? That's their first kind of logical is, okay, let me go to my local bank and see if they can help me. And a lot of times, again, we see...
We tried that. It was a disaster.
Okay. Right.
Exactly.
They may not do the SBA product that is specifically for acquisitions, right? So you're looking at a conventional loan. And if they do the SBA, how often do they do it, right? It goes back to the expert, right? Find an expert. And so sometimes they say, oh, I can't afford that business. But you're just not looking for the right resources, right? You don't know of the right resources to help you get there.
Exactly. So.
And conventional loans really aren't an option for most people because for lenders to lend that way, you have to be in that industry.
Correct.
And franchising, we're the opposite of that, right? It's like you don't have to have a background in that. Doug was not a plumber, and he invested in a plumbing business. So if he wanted to get a conventional loan, he'd get laughed out of the bank, probably, right, Doug?
Yep.
Because that reason.
But our lender was satisfied with that, and our lender loves Neighborly. I didn't even know this until later, but our lender was at the Neighborly convention last year.
Right.
Long after I did my deal. You got to talk to the right experts who can connect you as a buyer with the right outfits, and they're not going to be in your backyard.
Right. So now, Doug, it's been a couple years now, almost 2 years, coming up on 2 years that you've owned the business. So how is that? So we've talked about what it looked like to go through the evaluation process and make the decision to buy. What's it look like since then? I mean, how have the 2 years, almost 2 years been?
We're super pleased.
Okay.
Super pleased. And I have to give a huge portion of the credit to that to my predecessor.
Okay.
Right. And franchise or not, the evaluation of the seller as a person is key.
Right.
And our seller, husband and wife couple, had owned this for 22 years, wanted to retire before his 70th birthday. Their calculus was it was better to cash out than to try and hand it over. And just tremendous people. And so the only surprises that we have had have been good ones.
Oh, wow.
In 2 years. Now, that's not the way everyone works. We did a lot of diligence and we found, the perfect group, but it's been great for us. The surprises within the Neighborly piece have also been positive. And just one example, every franchisee gets a franchise business coach. Right. I didn't even know that when I signed. Right? It's not something you think of. With the royalties, at least I was thinking, okay, there's scale, there's purchasing power, there's software systems. But we get a franchise business coach. My franchise business coach, his name's Mike. I talk to him once a month. So that's actually a good thing. As much as I do enjoy Neighborly, I don't want to talk to you every day. Right. Because I am running my own business.
Sure.
Right?
You're busy.
So once a month we get on a call and he starts out and he shows me some of my numbers that get reported up in the system, and he shows me some benchmarks from across the system, and he says, "Hey, this is looking good. This is something you may want to work on." So that's valuable. But then the other piece, this cannot be underestimated, is the help he gives me from an accountability standpoint. Because I've told him what my big initiatives are.
Right.
And so every month he asks, "How are you doing on that?" He doesn't even have to know how to do it himself.
Right.
Just the fact that I've got this recurring thing with someone I can be open with who is saying, "How are you progressing?" Because one of the risks of being a business owner, there's nobody, it's all on you.
It's all on you.
Right?
You're in your own mind.
So you can have the best ideas, but poor execution. There's nobody, well, in my case, Georgina, maybe, saying, "Hey, you said you're going to do this," right?
Yeah.
That value of just touching base with somebody once a month who's going to ask you, "How are you progressing on that?"
Right.
I feel like we keep
cool.
going back to the value for the franchise versus independent. It's coming full circle. And it is. That was something I had in my head too, was accountability, right? When you're with the franchise and the business coach and even other people, other franchisees you mentioned earlier, right? You hold each other accountable.
I do want to emphasize, though, it's my decision. He doesn't tell me what to do.
Right.
He doesn't get up in my business. It's just helpful.
Yeah,
Right?
one of the ways I've always described, going back to kind of misconceptions and franchising and people thinking they don't have control, the franchisor has all the control. I've always found it really helpful from an analogy standpoint to explain to somebody looking at a franchise business. So let me explain what a franchise is and how it works. So just think about the franchise agreement, that document that you signed that has a lot of legal language in it, a lot of things you're not supposed to do, a lot of things you can't do. That's all in there. Yes, right? But all that is a roadmap, right? Think about that as the street out in front of your house. Right, that's the franchise agreement. There's a curb on either side. Right, the curbs are there to protect you. Right, they're there to keep you on the street because we know as a franchisor, we've mapped out how to get you to your goal, whatever that goal is. Right, we know which way to go. We know when to tell you to turn right, when to tell you to turn left. We know when to tell you to speed up, when to slow down, because we've mapped all that out. All the curbs are there as to protect you. They won't stop you. You can go over a curb. Right, but we know two things are going to happen when you go over that curb. One, the ride's going to get a little bit rougher because you're no longer on the pavement, right? And two, we don't know where you're headed because we didn't map that part out. Doesn't mean you're not headed in the right direction. You could still be. You could have found a different way and it works. Great. But your business coach you mentioned, their job is to get you back on the street, right? It's not to, be there to police you or anything like that. It's just hey, we know if you'll go here, it's going to work. I'm not sure if this is going to work. That's how I've always explained it, and people tend to understand that pretty well. So,
Well, I'll jump on that analogy with just, I got one more thing in mind. It even goes back to the misconceptions. It's possible that one misconception is, hey, if I join a franchise, it's going to be easy sailing.
yeah, there's that
They're
too.
going to do it for me.
You're right.
No. This game is only for the bold.
Yeah.
Right. It's rewarding, it's invigorating, it's potentially financially lucrative. Right? There's a sense of freedom and an excitement.
Right.
You're still a business owner.
Yeah.
And you could lose it all. It's,
Right.
You're right.
unlikely. But it's still, this is not for the faint of heart.
Yes.
If it's somebody who wants that control, is willing to take that responsibility, is willing to be humble enough to listen to the people around them, then the path of business ownership is fantastic. But just because someone's inside a franchise doesn't mean they can sit back in their recliner and cash checks.
Correct.
There's no
It
change there.
reduces a lot of risks, but not all of them. Right? There's still inherent risk in being a business owner. So one of the reasons, if there wasn't, there'd be a lot more business owners.
You can't have great rewards without some risk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and but from a wealth creation standpoint, there's really two main ways to create wealth in North America. One is business ownership; it's the best and the one that's most prevalent. The other is real estate investment. Right? Those are the two ways really to create wealth. It's very difficult to create wealth as an employee of a company.
Sure.
It's almost impossible. Right? And today we're seeing it's very difficult to create wealth through the market. Right? You can, but it's not easy.
Very true. And even I was a relatively high earning executive, kind of globe traveling guy. And now that I'm in the home services space and I have made friendships and business kind of relationships with people outside the franchise, just, the plumbing association in my town, I've joined some other small business groups. Like, this is where all the people are with money in America. They're all wearing jeans and driving trucks.
Exactly right.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, these guys are making more than the people I was hanging out with in the airport lounge, feeling really good about our miles.
Right.
They're the ones with the sweet bass boat.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So if somebody's interested in exploring franchise opportunities and resale opportunities with Neighborly further, where would they go to get that information?
Yeah, so we're going to bring up a QR code, right? So that'll take them to our website. They can inquire more. They can learn more about Neighborly at the website, learn more about the brands. I think really it's engaging with one of our resale franchise developers, right? And that first conversation is going to be more about what are you looking for, right? It goes back to what is your why? What are your goals? And then we can, across our 19 North America brands, see what might be available from an existing franchise location, whether that's in the market that they reside in today, or, potentially work with someone that's looking to relocate and they haven't decided where they want to relocate, right? So we really can help work with them to understand what are they trying to accomplish in that first conversation, and then look to see what Neighborly resale opportunities we have where they're looking for.
Closing thoughts.
Sure. I'd like to hit on the fact that in the resale space, someone may be looking at a business and going, I like the financials of that. I like that industry, but I don't have any experience in that industry. Right. So I'm not a plumber. I can't even be a plumber in my state. It would take 4 years of apprenticeship before I get a license.
Right.
And that's all right in my scenario, because the business was established and large enough that the professionals are there. There was a layer of supervisors, and I know every resale can be a different size, but there's some good size ones that come up every year. And so what the team needed from the owner and president was not technical expertise, but it was business leadership. It was making financial decisions. It was negotiating some deals with customers. And most importantly, it was setting culture, defining benefits, and just leading. And that's what I had done for the last 25 years in the military and in my corporate roles, was lead teams. So it has worked out, from my perspective, really well. And I think it's working out from the team's perspective. We have not lost a technician in our business for more than a year.
That's great.
And I think in the trades, that turnover is usually a lot higher.
Yeah.
Right? And so it can be done that someone comes from outside of industry and brings skills that are the fit for what that business needs, that are not the technical skills.
Well, and to that, be able to grow it even further, right? So you'd mentioned, the prior owners built a sizable business, right? But you've been able to take it to that next level.
That is true. Since we bought, we've grown at a little over 20% in just short of 2 years. And, I say we, the team's doing that work, but we brought some investments. We brought some new ideas, things that like the owner even told me would be good ideas, but he was just about his 70th birthday.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He needed to hand it off. And so we just have run that playbook and are seeing the results.
One thing I'd like to add is you mentioned, in that scenario, they were looking to retire, right? Been doing it for 22 years.
Yeah.
Is every resale is different. That's why I love resales, right? Every business is different. Every seller is different. And so in terms of why they're selling, that's really one of the first questions I get asked is, well, why are they selling?
Right.
And there's multiple reasons, just like, why do we sell a house? Well, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the house, right? It doesn't mean it's about to fall down and there's asbestos in it, right? So a lot of times it goes back to one of the misconceptions is, well, if they're selling, it must be something negative happening. And that's not the case, right? I mean, there are different types of businesses, like Diana, you mentioned, right? You've got the pristine growing business. You've got the more break-even business, but they are on that trajectory of growth. And then you've got the underperforming businesses. But the reason for selling could be relocation again, right? Their spouse maybe got another opportunity somewhere else and they're relocating and they don't want to run a business absentee, right? It could be retirement. They've been doing it for, 10, 15, 20 something years and they're just at the age of, they want to be on a beach somewhere.
Right.
I mean, it could be that was part of their plan when they purchased it, right? And so we talked about that as start with the end in mind. Maybe their plan is they love, I work with individuals that love the turnaround situations, right?
Yeah.
They buy a business, they get it at a good deal, right? It's underperforming and they turn it around with the goal of selling it and jump on to the next one.
Right.
And so I would just say that every resale is different, right? The reason why they're selling, is different. I would ask the question, right?
Sure.
Ask the question, why are they wanting to sell? But it doesn't always mean that something's wrong with it, right?
Exactly.
Is there anything to add?
Yeah, no, it along those lines, right? Like we kept saying all franchises are different, every business is different, right?
Yeah.
Every opportunity is different. I would what I would like to contribute is using, what I love about what I do too. I love that challenge because resales they're more complex. I always said they're not complicated, they're just more complex. And I like the complexity.
Right.
But when people do look, Doug, so when you took to Biz by Sell or Businesses for Sale or any of the major portals that are out there, what I hear a lot too is, there are people that have been looking for businesses for years. And I think when I hear that a lot, it's like, well, why didn't you find something, right? Are they not out there?
Right.
And it really goes back to the education. So whether you're a business owner now or you haven't been a business owner before, there's a lot of information out there that could be wrong. You really need a third party, an independent party. What I do is I'm able to help people go through an opportunity objectively. Right. I remove emotion from it. Because it's not my money that's buying the business. I'm not the person selling the business, right? I'm the person who's just trying to throw everything out on the table and assess it, and in the best way possible to be able to help them evaluate. Because there is a lot of stuff. If I had literally, I'll say a penny, not even a dollar. If I had a penny for every time I heard, I looked at this, but it was junk, or I looked at that, it was junk, or I don't know what I'm looking for.
Right.
So my advice to the audience is to seek advice. Whether it is from a knowledgeable business broker, intermediary, I should say, definitely help you through that process. Because you don't know. I'm going to say it. Everybody says it, so I'm going to say it. You know what I'm going to say.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So having that person help you look at things, not just even at the very beginning to find a business, but also if that person's able to be there with you through the due diligence process. Right? Because Doug was somebody who went through due diligence and, he knew what he was doing and he was focused and whatever. Not everybody has that same level. Everybody is at a different level there as well.
Right. This has been a great discussion. So lots of different topics, lots of great information. So I appreciate it so much. This has been really great information. And hopefully those of you watching got some great insights and tips on the best ways to move forward in your journey of business ownership and considering if purchasing an existing business is right for you. When it comes to franchising, we know there are many opportunities out there to consider. We hope you can see the kinds of thought leaders and resources you have access to when you work with Neighborly. When the time comes and you're ready to explore franchise business ownership, and possibly Neighborly, and any one of our 19 North American brands, you can visit our website at franchise.neighborly.com for more information, or you can reach out to us directly. We're always willing to help guide you on your journey or get you in touch with one of our experienced franchise developers. We've also provided a QR code, which you can see on the screen now. This will take you directly to the Neighborly Resale franchising site, where we continue to provide insight into why you would consider buying an existing franchise. Before you go, there are a few other reminders I have for you. A replay of this webinar will be available on our website, so you can rewatch it as many times as you'd like. We'll also provide the replay link via email for you to review or share with someone else. Be sure to check your email for information and to register for our next webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us today.